All right, my name is Andre Marino, and this is my concept application number 2 for nonverbal observation. For this, I spent my time at the 24-hour fitness gym in Redmond, Washington. I arrived at 5 p.m. and for my project, I had decided to do 50 minutes of cardio on the Stairmaster. I did not take notes on this because, well, I originally tried. However, I realized very quickly that um, walking upstairs and typing on my phone while still trying to observe people was not a feasible option, to say the least. I chose to go at 5 p.m. because, quite frankly, it's the busiest time, so I figured I would get the most interesting and kind of abundant social interactions in which I could determine the nonverbal communication. I had my headphones on with the volume rather low, so I could be able to emit any verbal communication from people while still being able to focus. Overall, the gym has a rather open floor plan in which there's cardio equipment located at the back, kind of overwatching the rest of the gym. That is one big open room with free weights, squat racks, cable machines, and other various exercise machines, if you will. I decided to choose the gym because it's somewhere that I go pretty much whenever I can, and it's always been something that I've found interesting, and I figured why not try and learn a bit more about it. All right, so for my first interaction I observed, I noticed there was two lifting partners. Both of these lifting partners were seemingly male in their mid-20s in age. One of them seemed to be rather more well-built than the other and was leading the workout, if you will. They were for the period of time I was observing their interaction, they were on the bench press and they were working out together. So in the aspects of nonverbal communication I noted were kinesics, the affective display was an overall sense of happiness with smiling and with smiling displayed by both of them. Um, for emblems, I noticed when they were talking about like after a set or during the set, they would use fingers to display how many reps or how many sets they had left. The illustrators were in general positive, reinforcing uh, gestures such as a thumbs up, gesture of hands to keep going, etc. I didn't notice any major adapters in the time that they were there. However, some regulators were just checking the time on their watch or the phone and kind of motioning to follow. This was once they were done, or once the less developed partner was done with their set, the other one would motion them to add more weight. So I figured that was a regulator that I noticed. Proxemics was personal space to intimate area, as they were either close to each other or spotting each other and helping lift up the bar, and sometimes guiding the elbows. Chronemics, it was rather fast paced to ensure the completion of their workout, as it was so busy at 5 p.m. that they're constantly being asked by other people how much they have left, and I'll get into that later. However, it was rather fast paced. The haptics was assistance in machinery such as guiding arms, which we talked about. Paralanguage was seemingly exclamatory, just as I said earlier, an overarching um, positive um, situation and interaction. The artifacts and objects that I noted were wrist straps, and they were wearing headphones. One of them had AirPods, the other one had, I don't know, Bose headphones or something like that. However, what I noted was they had both of their left ears exposed, so they could still talk to each other, which I found interesting. Which I mean, I also do when I lift with a friend, left or right ear doesn't matter for me, but that's the gist of it. Artifacts and artifact role, they had once again um, shared equipment with a rather more developed one had the wrist straps that he was sharing with his other buddy. Then, as I mentioned prior, the headphones on just one ear. I mean, in general, they both seemed as equals. The more well-built partner generally led the workout, seemingly with giving advice and whatnot. However, they did seem to both be rather equal in a sense. Some unspoken rules would be that people were often politely asking to use their bench press because that's one of the more popular stations, if you will, and there's only 4 of them in a completely crowded gym. And I noticed they would commonly use emblems to portray how many sets they had left, or how many minutes they had left. Because I noticed they would throw out maybe like a 10, or like a 3, like 10 for 10 minutes, 3 for 3 sets is something that it's an assumption. However, from my prior experiences, that's what I would say it probably was. And then my second interaction that I observed was very similar to the first interaction with the more well-built lifting partner and his buddy that he was lifting with. However, this was a more professional interaction, which is encompassed and we'll talk about in this slide. So the nonverbal communication aspect that I noticed through kinesics was an overall sense of happiness. Once again, an aspect display. I mean, neither of the trainer nor the trainee seemed to be upset or sad or frustrated. There was no frustration, which you could commonly see in a learning environment, as we know. However, I would say that there was an overarching sense of happiness. Emblems, once again, finger count for how many reps were left in the set. Sorry, I should have mentioned this is also on a bench press. This is the group of trainer and trainees that replaced the prior group. I wanted to observe the same interaction amongst different pairs of people to see how they were similar and how they were different. However, yes, finger count for how many reps were left in the set, as in the trainer was supporting the trainee, illustrator's thumbs up, and then motioning when to stop if the trainee seemed too tired or couldn't go any further. Once again, no real adapters. The adapters I noted were in the third case. However, regulators was checking a watch and motioning to follow once they were done once again. So it was a very similar interaction. However, the proxemics, once again, personal space to intimate area, such as guiding the elbows and the arms, as well as helping lift up the bar. The crinemics were fast-paced to ensure completion of the workout, exact same as before. Haptics was assistance, same as before. Paralanguage was exclamatory. It was like an overarching, encompassing happiness and uplifting interaction, if you will. And then the trainer had his whole case of equipment with him, which consisted of mobility bands, cable attachments. They didn't have any wrist straps like the other group, which was something that I had noted. And there also were no headphones this time. I figured that this may have something to do with the interpersonal relationship at play. The trainee needs to be paying more attention to the trainer, and vice versa. It would be unprofessional for a trainer to be listening to music, quite frankly. In addition to this, the trainer had a clipboard with paper, which I will presume was for just recording the workout as they go. For the social equity in this instance, the trainer demonstrated workouts followed by the trainee attempting and learning via correction. So the trainer originally had demonstrated how to undergo bench pressing, and the trainee followed, and then they made corrections every time. So the trainer obviously was leading the workout and demonstrated a higher role than the trainee. And unspoken roles, another difference that I noticed that I thought was actually very interesting, and is kind of why I wanted to watch the two similar yet different scenarios, is that in general nobody bothered the training session, even though they didn't have headphones or anything like that. Nobody bothered the training session, and I think that probably has something to do with the social equity in the gym. The trainers work there and probably have a higher role in what they get priority to. Okay, so the third and final interaction that I did observe was a somewhat slight altercation over equipment. Once again, this was a bench press. This was a rather elderly individual who happened to be taking his time on his phone, which seemingly caused frustration in a younger individual that had wanted to also use the bench press. Um, so yeah, we'll dive into that now. Overall nonverbal communication kinesics, affect display was anger from the individual who's been waiting for the bench press, and then the elderly individual seemed surprised when the other individual had come up to talk to him. Emblems, there was the elderly man portrayed 3 for how many more sets he had left, 3 or 2. Um, Maybe he wasn't sure, or maybe it was minutes too, I'm not exactly sure. But however, Emblem's finger count was once again used. We can see this is a pretty predominant theme here at the gym. Illustrators, shrugging gesture and palms raised. So the old elderly man had shrugged his shoulders. Maybe the younger individual had asked why he was on his phone or something like that, because I was observing the interaction and he was on his phone for a seemingly inappropriate amount of time from what I had observed earlier that day in comparison to other people. Adapters, touching of head and frustration, that was just from the person who wanted to use the bench press. Regulators was checking time on phone, the elderly individual, because maybe he was on his phone more than he thought or realized. The proxemics in general, this was a personal space area. It was within that 4 feet or so, I would say, and there was no there was no intimate proxemics in this case. Nobody touched each other or anything. That probably would have been completely different and inappropriate in comparison to our other 2 examples. However, the chronemics was, a rather rushed sense. There was an expectation not to be wasting time on phone. Haptics, the individual did tap the elderly person on his shoulders to get his attention because he was just locked in on his phone with his headphones on, and he was just kind of seemed to be checked out. Paralanguage, there was no shouting or yelling or anything like that, and it seemed to be rather nonchalant. And then the objects and artifacts were wrist straps, headphones, and phone. The younger individual had the wrist straps, meanwhile the elderly person was just on his phone and had his headphones in. Social equals and power difference. I would say that there was no difference in power amongst the individuals. It seemed as if they were both on the same playing field, and it was just a rather small dispute that eventually just worked itself out. The younger individual went and did something else. It was probably this interaction was, I would say, maybe a minute out of the 45 that I was there. However, I wanted to take note of it because it was drastically different. Some of the overall encompassing rules that I figured out of this are to not hog the bench press, and that goes for any machine, in addition to offering to allow someone to work in if they're comfortable with that. Okay, so overall, I believe from what I gathered in my time watching, the mechanism of nonverbal communication is ultimately just to have a general sense of courtesy and respect. Personal to social space. So rather just giving people their space, not getting too close, maybe like shaking hands or whatever handshake, individuals were comfortable doing together. In addition to friendly nodding and waving, in general, these interactions were short. This is interactions amongst the 3 that besides the 3 that I had talked about prior. So that just kind of other short interactions and passing is what it mostly was. And then besides this, there was gestures via regulatory methods and whatnot of indicating usage, whether that somebody wants to or whether it is being used by somebody currently.